Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome to episode 42 of the Age of Warfare podcast. I am Angelus Maximus. That is my man, the gate Aiden Cordier, and we are going to be talking about a pretty fun subject, the history of currency. And this came up in the last topic we did with Argentina, talking about why did Argentina have so many tough times economically, and then the idea of currency came up, and we kind of discovered. I mean, we kind of knew, but we kind of dug into the fact that currency is actually not. It's actually not as simple as we think it is. There's actually some very moving parts of currency. So I decided we should do the history of currency today. So before we get started, Aiden, how are you today, my friend?
I'm all right. A bit damp. It's been raining here. Went bowling this morning. Family outing was quite fun. And then my wife bought me a coat for my birthday. But obviously I had to go with her so that I could try it on, so she could get one in the right size. Yeah, apart from that, it's been quite a nice day. Well, as you can see, it gets dark super early here. It's pretty much dark already, and it's been dark since nearly 4. So,
Yep,
but apart from that, everything's good over here. What about you?
Everything's good here, man. Just finally starting to get a new cooler here, which is relative to being on a tropical island, but you can feel it. But once you live here for 10 plus years, you can feel the difference between just epic humidity and pretty pleasant weather. So, we're kind of enjoying it. Looking forward to Thanksgiving. I got a couple of things, got the turkey ready and all that good stuff. And yeah, I'm waiting for the 4-day weekend next weekend. Ready to just relax, catch up on some reading, and rest. So today, we're going to get into the history of currency. I'm kind of wondering if this is going to be a two-parter, because I don't want to just BS my way for this. We're going to start from the very beginning of currency, and we're going to talk about how currency is affected by consumer confidence, because that was a big topic when it came to the history of Argentina, about that currency is based on consumer confidence and all that. And so I thought the best way to start, right? The best way to start is all the way back in Sumerian Egyptian times, when we had what we call the barter system, bartering.
So this is if we take it back a little bit further as well to the earliest tribes and cities, bartering comes out of when you start to get cities, you start to get people being more specialized. So if you lived in a hunter-gatherer society, the community would work together to hunt or gather everything, and you'd spread out the tasks. In your average, say, small shop or workplace, everyone's got their tasks, they go about it, and together you run a shop. There's no you have to go and do something for someone else type of thing. Now, as soon as you start getting people who are more specialized, people are doing one thing. So you have a farmer and they're growing food. So they can eat. That's brilliant. But because they're spending their time making food, they don't have time to make clothes. They might make some clothes, but they might need, say, a plow. So if they want a plow, they're going to have to go to someone who can then make plows. Especially as you start getting more technology, people have to specialize,
right,
have to become better. So at that point, you have to then go, well, I don't have these things. What have I got to give someone else? And this is the economies that then forms, you say, Mesopotamia and Egypt. And this system comes out of that, humans becoming more specialist.
Right. So, basically, the definition right there for you guys. Bartering is the trading of goods or services between two or more parties without the use of money, or I might use the term fiat currency. And I'm sure you know what fiat currency is. It's what we use today. Is without the use of fiat currency, which is what money really is. So if you hear us say fiat currency, that's what that means. It's money. So let me put up another image here. So there's the basic idea. So I give you a sheep and you give me bags of grain. That was the idea of bartering.
So one of the interesting things.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One of the interesting things that comes out of this is bartering is still around.
Right.
this. We do have it that trying to work out how much for each thing. When you get trade agreements between countries, that is essentially bartering.
Yeah.
When you have sort of you've got car boots here, yard sales, garage sales, depending on where you live, those types of things. That bartering that you do with someone, while money is involved, that's more bartering for those types of things. And you'll even find it. You find it amongst the author community as well. So, for example, you might, a lot of authors can do something else, especially in the self-published scene. So, I
Yes.
can make a half-decent cover. Other authors are quite good at editing. They've got sort of a more
Yes.
sort of literary background.
You actually
So
read my
I
mind
might
there.
make someone a cover, and then they
Yep.
would edit my book for me,
That's
and
right.
then that would sort of be equivalent, and then we can both we both have the things
Yep.
that we need. It's the
And we,
exchanging of services at that
yeah,
point.
and that happens a lot in the indie community. Yes, especially in the indie horror community, I see a lot of that. And and I said you read my mind very well. That was exactly what I was going to come up with. So good, great things think alike. So very good. Yeah, that's a perfect example. Like I know authors are what we call starving artists. That's the common. Yeah. So this is the way I edit your work. I beta read, and you review my stuff, and yeah, that's the bartering system in a nutshell. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to give you sheep or grain, but but like you said, that's a perfect example of in modern society.
So there's other ones that go along with this. So, for example, my best mate, his son
Uh-huh.
is the same age as my son. He's about to go into GCSE. So they've done what in the UK is called SATs. It's standard testing. It's a bit different to the US one. And what that is to sort of give you levels of where they're working at if they're falling behind in things, so you can gauge what they need. And he was falling behind a little bit in his English, which they thought was a surprise because that kid reads constantly. So they had a friend from church who is older. She's a retired English teacher. So she tutors their son. And my mate is like me. We quite like gardening, and he's got an allotment, so he's got all the tools and everything. So he does her garden while she
Uh-huh.
tutors his son. So that is another thing. You'll find it a lot in especially close-knit communities as well. Farming communities, again, you still have this basic thing coming along. You'll have someone who concentrates on animals, and you have someone who's concentrating on grains, and then they might swap. Say, all right, here's some wheat you can go and make bread, and here's I've just taken some animals to the slaughterhouse, so here's some meat, and then both people can have those. You'll find that these things, we still use it in society a
Right.
lot as well,
Correct.
and it's not just poorer people that do it; it's
Yeah.
all throughout society at different levels.
Yeah. Now, bartering is a really good way of funding the economy. In fact, going on a bit of a tangent here, bartering could be the future should we get into economic apocalypse.
Yes.
In fact, I'm reading a book right now written by a friend of mine talking about apocalyptic economics, talking about a universe where bullets will become currency. You trade bullets or you trade whatever in a small community. Apocalyptic economics. Should
Yes.
it be an economic downfall in our fiat currency?
It's one of those things, and you'll see it quite a lot more because the way the finance works, it's the money's so digital nowadays. It's like in the UK, there's the amount of people that as I work in a shop that I've served at the till, and their phone's not getting any signal. I'm like, oh, just use your card. And they don't carry the cards anymore. It's all on their phone. They just walk past, swipe their phone, and then they're paid for it and walk out. Like we don't even have to interact with them. They just like go to the till, scan their items, wave the phone about, and then that's them done. And that's a common thing now. It's that we have this like money's just become a thing we have to do, but people do that helping side of it because people aren't thinking about physical currency of things, and because people don't have that physical currency. Say when you want something off of a mate, there's, for example, I play Warhammer miniatures, and I had a friend who had some that he was getting rid of, but he wanted to get some of these other ones. I happened to have some of those that I wasn't using, so I traded him those for his model. If we were still carrying cash around a lot more, I'd have probably just given him a tenner as well. So it's the more we move into digital currency, this barter style comes along a lot more as well. And you're finding this sort of like two-tier economy starting to go on, which is kind of exciting as well from the whole gig economy idea, and from people like us who like authors and artists and creatives. With the things that we share with each other as well.
Yeah, exactly, man. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. Another conversation put about bartering. If bartering sounds so good, why did it get replaced? And I have a pretty good theory why bartering got replaced, because it all goes back to consumer confidence. And I want you to imagine this. Imagine I give you a sheep and you give me grain. What if I told you my sheep is worth more than your grain? How do we determine what's worth? What's the worth of your item? If I give you this, I'm going to want a lot more, because I feel that my sheep is worth more than your grain, a lot more. Or if you want to give me a horse, but it's not worth as much, people get starting into fight saying, "Oh, what you're giving me is worth less than what I'm giving you. I need not more than." It becomes a situation. How do we determine value of an item? And I think that's what. Yep.
Yeah. So this then starts getting into supply and demand. So if we're using our agricultural basis here with the sheep and the grain, you might have a particularly bad growing season, so there's less grain. So you can't give them as much grain to their sheep. They obviously want more grain, so the value of the grain goes up because there's less of it around.
Yeah.
While you could have most of your diet being the thing that you've got. If people aren't then doing that trading, that sort of stagnates everything. And this is where community comes into it as well. One of the big things as society increases, if you look at it nowadays, by people knowing their neighbours. Even when we were children, you'd know your neighbours. You knew exactly who your neighbour was. If you say your mum had to run to the shop while your dad was out at work, they might say to the next door neighbour, "Oh, do you mind if he comes round for a bit, or do you mind coming round and looking after him for a bit?" That doesn't happen as much anymore. Some areas it does. So we've got friends here. Our friend who lives downstairs. So we do have we have that little bit more for us, but a lot of people don't know. So my two direct neighbours, there's one of them. I think I've said about 2 words to him the entire time I've lived here, and I've lived here for 12 years. The other guy I've had some conversations with, and I sort of know him, but that's just because he's almost deaf. So he came round when we moved in to warn us that he has his TV on loud for that, because he was being the good neighbour type of thing. And I tend to bump into him in the shop and have a bit of a chat. But if you don't know your neighbours, you end up in a situation where, as Angel was saying, sort of, I value this more than you value this when you're with friends. So that example of me trading models with a friend, we both know the value of the models, both know the value of the models to us. That's very easy for us to sort out. I'm like, "Oh, you wanted this thing, or if I give you this thing, you can do that thing." Brilliant. So when times are okay, or you're doing something relatively simple, it works. But as soon as it starts getting bigger and you start having the bigger markets you don't know that person. You don't know if that sheep they're giving you, the reason that they're trading their sheep is because they've had some foot and mouth. So they're worried that their sheep are going to be sickly. So they're just trying to get rid of them so they don't end up losing their flock.
Because it's not going to be worth as much.
Because you're not in the same small community. If you're in the same small community, you know that farmer had that problem, and therefore you wouldn't take the sheep. Whereas
it's like the example I gave you. Right? It's like the example I gave you in the apocalypse. You have a whole bunch of bullets, but but you're stuck in a small community where everybody has bullets, and the apocalypse is not it's you've gotten over it. All of a sudden, your business ain't worth as much because there's nobody fighting, nobody surviving, everybody's thriving now.
Yeah.
So that's I guess that you could say as one of the biggest weaknesses of bartering is eventually you might have a whole bunch of goods that once upon a time was worth a lot, but now it's the demand is so low that nobody wants it because you can get it anywhere. I can get it from my neighbor. It could give it to me for a cheaper price.
So the other thing that comes up with this is,
Uh-huh.
so you've got your farmer with his sheep, and you've got your farmer with his grain, and then you've got the person who does the leather work,
Yes.
and you
Hmm.
need a new apron for butchering, so you need to trade that. The guy who's doing the leather work is like, yeah, I could take some sheep, but he's not around for a little bit. So you need to trade, and but you can't butcher without said apron.
Right.
So you
Hmm.
then need a way of having a middleman in that situation. If I then trade my sheep to you, then that person who's doing the grain, well, you don't need to butcher grain, therefore he doesn't need any of the leather items. So how is he going to get hold of his grain?
Hmm.
Because he's then got to rely on the guy with the sheep having got enough grain that he can then use that as a price. So you get these other bits of economies. As soon as you have three people involved in the mix, it becomes a bit more of an issue
Right.
because if I'm trading, if I want that, and they says, well, I don't want your sheep, I only want grain. So you go and trade your sheep for grain. Well, that's extra time that you've got to do that, and then you've got to store the grain, and that's not your grain to use. You've got to take on more grain than
Hmm.
you wanted, which means you've got to have more sheep than you wanted to trade away to then move. To find an easier way of doing that,
Right.
you need sort of a promise between some
Right.
that somewhere
Hmm.
along that line. You need a way of going, well, look, there's this much of goods or services that I've done, especially in the service industry as well. This happens.
Right.
So
Hmm.
when it's physical objects, it's much easier to work out in that you just have a discussion and then eventually you work out a way of doing it, even if it
Uh-huh.
is three different people. But when it's services involved as well,
Right.
it's if I'm doing this service for you, say you're building something can take a while.
Yeah.
So you can't
Right.
wait till the end of that. So they're going to have to give you things along the way.
A
Or
deposit.
when you're rearing sheep, your sheep take a while to grow.
Yeah, they
So
do.
if
Right.
you want the wool from the sheep, you've got to wait until the sheep grows up to do that. So you can't go around butchering all the sheep for meat and doing the easy part because you're never
Right.
going to get any wool that you
Yeah.
then need to trade to someone who's then going to trade to someone else to make something out of the wool
And
that
and
they've
that's
made into thread
and
and
that's
then
another
sell.
and that's another thing about bartering. Sometimes the good I have, it takes a while for it to actually appear. You might have a good that's like instant. I have the wool, but that takes time. So obviously it's worthless at first because it's not there. It's only going to go up in value once I have the item.
And then you
And
have on top of that
like
storage. Because
yeah,
if you're then having to keep a lot of things together because you need to have various items to trade with people, or you're doing something long term like farming, then you need to have a surplus of those goods that are put away, therefore, that you can use those things, which means that you need to store stuff, which then means you need to do extra work to do that, to have all of that storage. It's one of the big things that was with supermarkets, for example. Here's a really good example of something you take all the way through. If you've got a shop, obviously you have the stuff that's on the shelves, and then you have the stuff that's in your warehouse that needs to go onto the shelves, and then you have deliveries of those items. Now, these days, you can have those lorries turning up every single day, giving you stuff. It's digital. You can order the stuff in, and within a few days' time, you'll have that. You'll have an alternative product that you can put out there because there's so much choice. So we can do that. But when you don't have as many of those things and it takes the horse and the cart coming from the next town, you need a bigger place to store things. You need to store things longer term as well. There's quite what's quite interesting is if you go into some of the very small shops, their warehouses are absolutely tiny. They're no bigger than a bathroom in
right.
some of them because there's no need for having backstock. They get stuff delivered and it just goes on the shelves. That is the stock that they've got. because people buy stuff digitally. So you have it all in the central warehouse, and then you go from there because we have that quickness. So then you start having space becomes a premium because you need to be where you need to sell to people, which means you're in a town. And if you're in a town, they're like, well, you're taking up a lot of land in this town just to gather all these things together. As soon as you've done that, people might want to steal the things. People might, the building might set alight, it's thatched. So you've got all of these other things that you then have to think about along the line. So it's a matter of scale. As soon as you start scaling up, bartering then becomes quite difficult to do for those larger everyday things like food, clothing, and basic necessities.
Well, all right. So before we move on to the next stage of currency, I kind of want to go another a small little tangent, not too long. A good game that deals with the bartering system well is Civilization 3. Believe it or not, because in order to build certain units like swordsmen, you need iron, right? And if you don't got iron, but the other civilization has iron, you know what you do? You barter, you trade. I'll give you wines. I'll give you some of my luxury goods that will help your citizens become happy. If you just give me a little bit of iron for 20 tons, or I can give you a technology. You know, obviously in Civilization 3, obviously you're not going to give somebody a technology. That's a civilization thing. There's no such thing as giving technology, but but we're talking about the end game. You could give technology for resources. Perfect example of bartering right there.
And that is, and this goes to what I was saying before about international economics is still very, very similar to the bartering system as well. Well, you do have we're going to set up this deal where we will purchase X from your country over this amount of time financially. Often it will come with other stipulations as well. When you look at military equipment, for example, there's you have to agree that there's certain components that will be manufactured in certain places. There's certain people who are allowed to fix it because of proprietary technology. So it might be that they'll send you these things, but you're better at making components. Like famously between the UK and the US, you've got a larger base for basic manufacturing for making, say, your plane. Whereas we've got some really good higher tech guidance system things as well. So there'll be that trade between countries. While often it'll be, you trade us one thing, we'll give you money for it. We trade you this thing, you give us money for it. Sometimes they sort of intertwine, and you still see that bartering in there to a certain extent.
Yep. So obviously, after the bartering system kind of went through its weaknesses, then you had the Egyptians. Then the Egyptians invented a system where they use this is another good game that I like. It's called Children of the Nile, which is a city building game. Where you don't have money. What they use, the currency in that game is what they call bread, food. They use food as currency. So wheat was obviously for the wheat is for the rich. Then you had barley and vegetables. So you would use those kind of food items to buy things in the kingdom. So Egypt had at first in the Archaic period they had what they call the food system. They use food as currency.
It's one of the interesting things about it is it's very similar to a barter economy because you're handing over an item for that other item. That item that you're using as your currency at that point is still a useful item. If I'm handing over grain as an item, the other person can make the grain. But they might not necessarily do that. They might store the grain then to use as a currency. Therefore, so certain items start to appear that we use this thing for currency rather than for other things. And then a sign of affluence is being able to do something else with it. Another great example of this would be with the Aztecs and with gold being so common. And it was brightly coloured feathers were something that was used as currency eventually as well. So you could see that wealth because it's an item that you're trading as well. Because while you end up getting coins and notes and things like that. You at first, all you're doing is you're picking an item that everyone agrees, right, if we hand this item over, this item's worth this much of a thing. And it can be anything. As you said, they went with, well, we've been doing this with food for a while, so why not make that the thing?
Yeah, but of course, the biggest weakness in that system was that food is also something you need to survive. So using it as a currency wasn't necessarily the smartest thing, because then you had the poor people would just try to go around and steal from the upperclassmen. Then Egypt invented then Egypt invented this. This is what they called the Egyptian divan, which was pretty much one of the first currencies in the first fiat currencies in the world, the divan. So this was a unit of measurement in Egypt. So basically, it's basically like a copper coin, like the Egyptian version of the copper coin, the divan.
And what's interesting about it is it's got a cartouche on it to name. So there's like we'd have on our coins today, you have your country's name on the coin or somewhere. And this is the earliest stages of this, saying, right, so someone could get a load of these and they could start carving them up, but unless it's got this thing on it, it's not worth anything. Also, you can use it as a measure because of its weight as well, which is a thing that we will get into. Weights and measures and currency go hand in hand.
And actually, we're going to get to that right now, because the divan was a unit of weight used to measure quantities of wheat, barley, and other grains known in ancient Egypt. So here we go. So basically, one Egyptian divan was worth about 90 grams.
So but, you could. Yeah.
But the Egyptians did not use money until the 5th century BC. Actual money. So they kind of went on the system for quite a while until the new kingdom.
It's the whole weights and measures thing sticks around for a long time. So there's something the Romans had called a steelyard as well, and even so I just about remember it from my childhood in village shops, but people older than us will probably remember it. Of going to shops, and they'd have the scales and they'd have the weights, and the weights would have stamps on them so that you knew that they were official ones as well that you'd put on, so you'd get X amount of something. Obviously then we got to digital scales where you put, say, your meat on it and it came to whatever price in the butchers, but originally it would just be the physical scales, and they go, there's this much of this. And in that, you can modify your prices then, depending on the markets as well, which is a different thing. So while you could weigh out 90 grams of that 90 grams of whatever you have may not be worth as much. Say you had a really good harvest one year. Oh, cool, yeah, you've now got 180 grams of wheat. It doesn't mean you're twice as rich, because everyone else has got loads of this as well. So this is the supply and demand. The quantity of it grows as well. So you've got this measure of weight, but they're still seeing this need to move to put something else in there as well.
So basically, a common misconception among people was that this divan was actually used to change hands between consumers. That's not how it really worked. It would pretty much work that it could be used to settle bills into trade. So it showed that the actual metal did not change hands. Instead, it was used to value goods for exchange. So I didn't really give you that to exchange. It really wasn't worth anything. It was a unit of measurement, that's why I said, if you ever play Pharaoh on the PC, a city building game that has Stephen as actual currency, that's kind of historically inaccurate.
Yeah, it's a bit of an anachronism to create the things for the game. But
I mean, but of course, but of course, making this system of weights would have been too confusing for the game. So they had to make it easier so they can make it into a game, so you could actually enjoy it instead of getting bogged down to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They had to simplify it for the gamer, because the gamer is not there to. I mean, it's there for historical facts, but they're the point of the game to actually enjoy it.
So with this whole weights and measures thing, I'm imagining obviously then this is where obviously you get pharaohs, you're getting a bureaucracy involved
Right.
because you could quite easily with this break a little bit off of someone else's or your own, and now suddenly you're weighing out the amount of grain. So if you're weighing out less grain, for example, you go, right, cool, yeah, I'm doling out grain. And then you spend the night, you just file the corner down a little bit. Your weight is now less as well. You're like, no, that's nice. See, look, I'm using it even. It's the correct amount of grain. Oh, it doesn't seem like it's as much as I got before. So you then start to get into there, people trying to do those types of things. This is where scamming then becomes a thing. As soon as you've got any currency and exchange and trade and things like that, this is where the scam starts to come into it. As soon as you make it more complicated with a single direct measure, then there's something that people can directly influence, which is where you then end up with Egypt obviously having this bureaucracy that it has, very,
Right.
very important bureaucracy.
So yeah, eventually bureaucracy and just the confusing nature of the system kind of forced Egypt, to get away from the diva system and actually start making coins. Although that would be closer to Alexander the Great, when his constituents got Egypt, and then Egypt became the polytheistic empire, which is a whole nother subject there. Now, I want to get into what came after this. Do you know what this might be?
That is I have seen several of these. That's a very early coin. There's something really interesting when you talk about coinage. You've got
Yep.
something called tokens and you've got something called coins. Now, coins and tokens look very similar when you start off looking at them as well, because coins are effectively a type of token, but tokens actually serve a slightly different purpose as well, which I won't
Okay.
go specifically into here, because that's something that I will bring up at a later point when it becomes when we start talking about some of the medieval systems as well, under the guilds, because that's where they've come to great prominence.
This is ancient Greek drachma.
So drachma, yeah, yep.
Yep. The drachma, the Greek drachma. Yep. This was early, and also this is and this is that's the owl, which was the owl was the symbol of Athens.
Yes, which is one of the reasons we use an owl as a symbol of wisdom, or vice versa.
And then this is Alexander the Great, and a drachma with Alexander the Great on it, of course. So you could say that drachma was one of the first real fiat currencies, that was actually used as a currency. It was made out of silver, and iron. But you could say it's one of the first fiat currencies that that they didn't involve bartering or trading goods. That this was actually an actual currency that was legal, what we call legal tender, which is a very important terminology as legal tender.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about this is, and one of the reasons that you see this so early in Greece is Greece has a lot of silver mines. It's one of the reasons the Romans invaded them. So Spain's also got quite a lot of silver as well. So you have these areas where you have the silver. So when you're creating a currency, you go for a metal that is relatively easy to get, but at the same time has some worth to it as well. Something you're not using for anything else. Because realistically, what else are you going to use silver for? It's like we have very few applications for it in the modern world as well, apart from making things look pretty. But then we use chrome for that a lot these days. But if you've got no electricity, gold is easy. Gold today is mainly used for computers. So you're trying to look for something where you can control the supply of it, yet at the same time is common enough that you can control the supply of it and you can get it relatively easily, but at the same time isn't something that someone else can replicate. Otherwise, there's no point in having currency, because that kind of falls apart at that point.
Then I think we all should know what this is. The popular Roman denarii.
Does it have? So one of the interesting things on Roman coinage is the Romans calculated their years by how long the consul had been in charge. Emperors were always consuls as well. So it's in the consul year X, this person's ex-consular year that you find on coins. Also, the ones done by the Senate have SC on them on the other side. But yeah, they went for a complete range of them.
Yeah, but this is the Roman denominations. Yeah, these are the different denominations. Yeah, and Romans were one of the first ones to introduce denominations. That it wasn't just one single coin. You had many different types of coin depending on the content of the metal. Like quadrants was made out of bronze. Then you had semis, which was made out of orichalcum. And obviously, if you ever learn about the history of orichalcum, it has quite the interesting history dating back to the days of Atlantis. Orichalcum. Yeah, you should look up the legend of that.
Really should, yeah.
Yep. And then and then of course you get up from orichalcum to bronze, silver, until you eventually get to gold. Which is worth 25 denarii, the highest denomination, which is made out of gold, pure gold,
which is literally called gold. His name is Latin for gold. But
there was another interesting idea, because even though you had gold coins, one would also use gold for jewelry. For jewelry. And there's kind of a theory saying that some gold was worth more than other kinds of gold. It kind of begs the question: how do you know the worth of gold? How do you know is it pure gold or not pure gold? And how do you go about using it?
So there's I think with gold as well. So if you get gold in Thailand, it's a different color. And talking to my dad about it, said, say you get mugged in Thailand, they will take your Thai gold, but they will leave your European gold because it looks different. It's more easily trackable because it's European and it has certain markings, but it doesn't have that look. It's a different type. So you get the brighter yellow, and then you get something that's not quite. It's almost sort of more silvery as well. I'll just try and find my wedding ring, whatever I've done with it. But yeah, it's European gold and Asian gold. Two very different golds. So you have you look at the colours, but what you're talking about is debasing a currency, which was also done intentionally. This is an interesting part to Roman economics. So they had all of these different denominations, but one of the things you do is people will have heard the term quantitative easing because that's a very modern term. But when you don't have as much gold or as much silver and you want it to go further, you start adding lead in. Because lead's not that different in weight if you're adding it in small quantities, but lead's also incredibly common and incredibly cheap. So the silver content of your silver coins decreases as well. So Diocletian sorted this out. There's several points in the Roman Empire where the coinage was so debased that this levels of coin, if you had a certain emperor's head on your coin, and it was silver or gold, it wasn't worth as much as someone else's coin that was silver or gold for that fact, which ties into exactly what Andrew was saying about how do you know that how much gold is in this coin.
And then we got a little diagram here showing the different denarii based on the emperors, like Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, Fantusis the Elder, So that was kind of a tradition towards the Empire era to print the emperor on the coin. That was kind of a tradition the Romans had.
And this was something emulated by tribes around the Roman border. So if you look at some of the early Saxon coinage and some of the Celtic coinage as well, they've got this emulation of, say, a tribal leader when he was powerful enough and controlled an area. He would start putting his face on the side of coins. And it was a very big thing. If you put your face on the side of a coin, either it was oh, look, he's full of himself, he thinks he's big, or it would be a sign of power that you had enough that you're able to do this. And that came from what the Romans were doing as well. People saw the Romans doing this and they were trying to emulate it.
So we have coins, right? And so we kind of ask you kind of ask yourself, what's wrong with why do we keep not using coins? And the problem is they're made out of silver and gold. And what's wrong with those resources? They are exhaustible resources. They're not non-exhaustible.
While you explain this, I'll be right back.
All right. So basically, as you may well know, gold and silver are not non-exhaustible. That means we can actually run out of gold and silver eventually, where it will drive up the prices of those items because we're going to run out of them. So so that's why we kind of moved on to more renewable resources like paper, which is trees, and you can always plant new trees and all that. So that's why, in my theory, wars happen or not because I want the gold, I want the silver, I want the bronze, I want the copper, I want all the resources. That way I can keep making money. I can keep printing, making money and all that stuff. And at one point, when anything comes by, I want to get into the Chinese. Chinese, because they were kind of one of the first ones to invent print money.
It's
but before they got into print money, they actually used wood for money. And I always wonder, that was always a very interesting idea that they had they would use wood for money in China, in the imperial China. We're talking about after while Rome was rising, you had ancient China on the other side of the world.
It's one of the interesting things I find about it is, for coins, what you're looking for is that metal is worth that much. You have this piece of metal, and that is the worth of that amount of metal. So you'd have older UK notes. You can still see it on this one. So traditionally, if you can see there's that line that goes down here.
Right. Yeah.
That's silver embedded in a note.
Oh, hold on, Aiden.
£10.
Can you show that again? Yeah, we gotta show that. There we go. Yeah, we got a better view of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's traditionally, I can't remember if that was just left in there as a security thing by that point, but traditionally that would be the amount of worth in there. So when you've got a currency based on silver or gold, it's the weight of that amount that you'd want rather than the denomination. So you'll often hear, I want you to pay me X amount of pounds of silver. It's something with the Vikings as well, something called hack silver. So it's the weight of the silver is how much it's worth as well. So the coins would be worth that equivalent as well. So then you get into these, which are very interesting.
Yeah, bamboo currency in China. Yeah, this is like and this brings me to another game that I enjoyed, Emperor Rise of the Middle Kingdom, which was another city building game that takes place in ancient China, where in the early ages you have to, you cut wood. You cut wood and you bring the wood to a tax connector, and they start taxing people with the wood, with bamboo.
So something that happens as a medieval thing is something called tally sticks. as well, so that you know how many times you've done something, because you're tallying something up. So many cultures have come up with this idea of using wood to secure currency to a certain extent. But what's interesting about this is the item itself isn't really worth a thing. It's a representation, which is what the coin is, a representation, but the coins are actually worth something.
Correct.
You could melt down a load of silver coins and then you'd have a load of silver. You can't do that with wood. You throw that in the fire and then you've got some ash and it isn't worth anything. So it is just directly just a representation of that thing.
See, and that's a very important thing. That's what people. It's why people need to realize that's what currency really is. It's a representation of what something is worth based on consumer confidence. Going back to the episode we did with Argentina, consumer confidence. And this is, and that's a big deal. Now let's move on to what came after this. This is one of the first Chinese bills when the Chinese invented paper money in the 8th century. When they invented paper money in China.
It always amazes me how early it was that they managed to invent that.
I mean, like the Chinese invented the crossbow.
Yeah. It was the...
and some people say that China invented pizza.
Oh, yeah, I've come across that.
That's a very... But yeah, I mean, this is a paper money. So they basically took the wood and put it in a printing machine. And this is why some people say that China invented the first printing press was invented by China. This is where you started getting to the printing press.
So one of the interesting things about that, as we've talked about a lot on many episodes, is necessity means you get inventions. And why? When you've got somewhere as big as China and you've got so many people trading, you need something that you can regulate amongst those things. Like I was saying before, when you've got the bigger the area and the more people interacting and the less likely they are to know each other, the more you need a representation of something that is secured against something that is, the government says it's worth this much.
Right.
And therefore it is. So it's one of the reasons they developed it so early, because of the sheer size and population of China. They had a need for it a lot earlier than in the West. I dare say the Romans would have invented some form of paper money. They'd have probably ended up using papyrus for it, to be fair.
Yeah.
They'd probably invented that if they'd have still been around. But after the Romans go away, you get the kingdoms which are smaller. So this is where coinage becomes a thing again, because you don't need those notes, because your coins are worth something when you're trading with someone from outside of this area that you're in. It's the weight of the item. So and this is why I said about debasing coins, that it would be known that such and such a monarch would debase his coins, so they wouldn't be worth as much because they're gold quantity, for example. But you can do that a lot more easily when you're talking about smaller populations. When you get a larger population, you kind of need to do something like this to be able to have that, and then lean completely into this fact that all this is a promissory note. That's all the paper money is. It's, I have this much worth of wealth that I have done something with. I know I keep it in this until I move on to the next thing.
But now I'm gonna get into a question. China invented paper money, but it wasn't necessarily a thing in the Western world. The Western world was still using coins, florins, whatever you name it. And I kind of thought, why did paper money not become popular in the Western world until much later? And the theory I have is war. Because everybody was still fighting over resources. Everybody in the Western world still believed that copper, cobalt, all these precious metals were still the way to go. These were still valuable resources. They didn't know what China was doing on the other side of the world with their fancy paper money. We're still fighting with swords, iron, you name it.
it's that connection to the East that's
Yep.
broken. So whereas, like I said, the Romans would eventually develop this because of the sheer size that the Roman Empire was becoming. As soon as you get small kingdoms, it's one of the things that they say after the collapse of Rome, we lost all of this technology. It's not. It's just a different way of thinking about things. If you're, say, the Saxons who come to what is now the UK after the Romans have been here, you don't need a forum because your government system doesn't use forums. You don't need bards because your bathing is in a different way. You're an agricultural based economy, so actually you need land to farm. You don't live in cities because you don't have a service economy that you're really dealing with. So things fell out of use because they weren't being used. And one of the other things, while you do have that Byzantine bit in the middle that does connect, you don't just have the collapse of the Roman Empire, as we've discussed before. That whole area of the Middle East has collapsed as well. So you don't really get this East-West connection where these
Right.
ideas can travel across very easily. And then when they do, it's a mere curiosity. And because you don't have, is what I was talking about, if you don't have a service economy with this higher technology because you haven't needed it, you're not doing things like being able to print money. You're not being able to do things like make paper. Paper is incredibly difficult to make as well, the technology needed for it. Hence why they were still using vellum. It was all vellum and papyrus until a lot later as well. Whereas China had obviously got this, and then they were able to sustain it. Whereas it never really arose in the West because the Roman Empire collapsed before they reached that point.
Right. Exactly. And this is where I think the Roman collapse really changes the world. It really prevents the Western world from really what's the word I'm looking for? Advancing like China did. Like China didn't have much competition. China was just going for the motions, just going. I mean, the only problems China had was internal, would be the fat emperors. But you know that they never really had an outside influence until the Mongols came in, and that changed it. That changed their world. But that would be until the 1200s or something like that. That would be for a very long time. Meanwhile, the Western world, it's like you have all these different tribes, the Franks, the Britons, the Celts, you name it, they're all fighting amongst themselves. They never really got it on. So that's a really
it's the perpetuating of that culture of the village rather than city being the core of where people live.
And it makes and what you said about the Romans makes sense because look at Rome. It was a big empire, but it was contested. First, you had the Etruscans at first, then the Samnites, right? Then the Carthaginians, the Iberians, the the Gauls, then the Britons when you got up to Londinium, modern day London, and then until a little bit of a tangent here. Then you had the first sack of Rome by Berennius, who was a Celtic Celtic general who sacked Rome in 387 BC.
Which is why they have that massive fear of the Romans there. So they've always got this external stuff that can get to the core of their empire as well, which does hold. This one of the reasons. So the Roman technologies we've talked about before is really interesting in this because they often take technology. They took Greece, and that's where you get a lot of their thought and philosophy and poetry and things like that from the Greek side of things. And then they start looking into various different areas and start taking that and going, that's good, we'll therefore do that. Right. And then they do build upon the technology, but because they're beset on all sides and they're so focused on the military aspects of it that
it's different. There's a bust of Bonarius, the guy who sacked the first guy to sack Rome. And really, from that point on, this is why Rome kind of got away from bartering and kind of had to develop their own currency really fast because they realized, wait a minute, we need more soldiers. We need to develop an even more advanced form of currency, or else groups like this are going to continue to take us over.
Yeah, and as soon as you've got a decent enough military, you can then start centralizing those resources.
Exactly.
Like putting all that grain in there. It's like, no, we'll hold your grain. We'll buy it off you. Here's the money for your grain. So you know that you've got, here's a thing that you can use to go and get the other things that you need. But we want to put all this grain away right now.
So yeah. So we're kind of running out of time. So this is actually going to be a two-part episode, which I kind of predicted that it would be because it's just so much to cover. But let's kind of tackle quickly guilds because that was a big deal in the medieval era. And if you play Medieval 2 Total War,
Yeah.
which you kind of need to when you get a better computer, guilds guilds can really be important because they can help improve your swordsmen. They can improve your merchants. They can, guilds are pretty important in that game as well, which is a good representation of how important guilds were in the medieval period. So, what is a guild exactly in the medieval? For those who might not be familiar.
So with guilds, there's something else that I want to include with this that I'll do slightly afterwards. So eventually you get the rise of guilds. As you get all of these services and this technology of people being able to make certain things, you need expert training. You need an expert in the thing to be able to train you how to do the thing. So you would apprentice to someone to do that. Now the apprenticeship system has been around forever. That's the thing. You follow someone who's older with those skills. You learn said skills. So you'd join this guild, and that meant that you could then become once you'd finished your apprenticeship, you become what's called a journeyman in a guild. And a journeyman is because you would travel around, and it's putting out your shingle is something that's often talked about. Now the shingle would be a shop sign. It's literally that thing that flicks backwards and forwards as well. They've got a lot of them are actually, there was legal reasons why that they were up, unlike these days, which is why you don't see them so much these days. So the whole point of this was that, and this sort of said, it reaches a point in the medieval economy where there's so many people doing these things that you need to regulate it in some way to know that there's a quality for it. So the journeyman would go to different places to do those things. You've got something called journeyman blacksmiths, for example, or even silversmiths. Precious metals is far more common for as well. You travel to a place and then you'd fix their things. This became the tinkers, Irish tinkers over this. They turn up and then you take your pots and your pans and they fix all your pots and your pans in the village and then you move on. If you're a member of a guild, you could prove, look, I have the skills, I can do this, you can be comfortable giving me the money. This guild has said that. The guild can then use finances and regulate the thing. So if anyone's doing something that isn't great, they can get rid of them as well. So these guilds are still around. You get quite a lot of them. So, for example, the school that I went to was partially funded by the Merchant Tailors Association, which is a guild of tailors, and they had a guild hall. So you get these rising guild halls. If anyone ever comes to the UK, go and look at guild halls. They're amazing. And it's basically a gathering of people with certain set of skills as well. So you think about things like being a member of certain associations these days is the closest thing. So as an archaeologist in the UK, you might be a member of the IFA, which is the Institute for Archaeologists. So you become an associate member, a higher level. There's various levels of membership, very guild-like in this, that you would then pay the money to the guild, and then the guild would use that money to make sure that goods and services were there. It also meant that there was a certain level of insurance as well. You had that training and you knew that if someone tried to come after you legally, like you were working with a lord, you turned up in a community and the lord wanted you to come into the manor house and fix all the things in there, and you were a member of the guild that did that. You went in there and they went, oh, this isn't good enough because he doesn't want to pay you. The guild could then use your guild dues to help you out with that. So It's a little bit similar to a union,
Okay, yeah,
but it's
yes.
more a professional organisation than a union is. They help people with that profession, whereas a union helps people with how they're being treated as a job, um, uh, just in the sense of a job as well. So unions do get a bit more specialised along these lines as well, so it gets a bit muddy. But realistically, it's where guilds come from. However, when you've got guilds, you've also got banking. Now,
Yes.
banking is something that crops up in the medieval period that's incredibly important. The whole thing of this, and this actually starts with the Crusades as well. So there's a thing in Christian law and in Islamic law called usury. Usury is still a thing. It basically means you can't charge interest. You can't. You're using them. You're asking them for more money than you have lent them, and that's what you weren't allowed to do that. However, as we all know with banks, that's the only way that a bank can work is charging interest and moving interest around. That's how they work. And this then is where the Knights Templar come into it. So what they would do is you would go to your temple in the UK or France. You would then take your wealth along with you and go, here is my wealth that I wish to take with me when I go on crusade. I'm going to deposit that with you. They would then write you a letter that you would take with you, so you didn't have to carry your gold and risk getting mugged. When you reach the temple in Jerusalem, Acre, or wherever you're going on your crusade, you could then hand them a note, and they would then give you the money. So you've then got a deposit transaction system going on here. So this is why the Templars ends up quite wealthy, and it's a type of banking system, but it's a savings bank system. You're giving them. They say, you've given us this much stuff. They have transported enough of that stuff to the other place that they can then give it to you out of what they've got there. It's I'm going to lend you this money and then you're going to give it back to me so I don't get mugged on the way. It's a bit different to the banking system. This is also where you get Jews coming into it because Jews didn't have a law against usury. And through various things with Jewish history, they were often outcasts in society and weren't allowed to do many jobs. So what a lot of Jews ended up doing was they would work in finance because they didn't have the usury laws, so they were able to finance. And because other people didn't want to do it, they were fine with the Jews doing that. So it was one of the only real jobs they had available in the medieval period, which is where you get things like the Black Death being blamed on the Jews. And then you find out a little bit later the reason that the king decreed that was because he owed the Jewish moneylenders lots of money. But it was, you have these banking systems start to build up. And those usury laws start to disappear around the time you start getting guilds. So people are starting to move this money around. You're starting to get a more modern economy going as well. And this is why you end up having these guilds, because they can then set prices for their work to make sure that people are being paid properly as well. This is where I said they're a bit similar to unions in a certain aspect of it. If you are a guild member of this, you're not just someone helping someone out, and you demand a certain amount of payment for it, you can because you're a member of that guild. You could then go to your guild could then go to the banks, and then you've now got a banking and savings system and a guild that will work with you and secure you, allowing you to do all of these things. That then makes you have now an economy. You've got a bunch of specialists who are now securing their profession. You've got specialists that have got training to the level of they can charge large amounts of money. So you've then got large amounts of money changing hands that needs to be put somewhere and secured. So you need the people to do that. And these aren't just the guy with the castle who puts it all in his treasure room, because these are your average people coming up. This is where the middle class starts to grow. You need a banking system if you've got a middle class to be able to secure that, because a middle class person doesn't own a castle, so it doesn't have a treasure room and doesn't have people to protect it. So they outsource that to someone else who then, and this is where banks then start to appear. And it's around this time of the guild systems. It's the guild systems that push this use of money, the banking, the setting of prices, and the formalization of the economy starts to come about because you have guilds. If you don't have guilds, you don't end up with the formalization because there is no need for it. And then the banking system sort of totters along like it always had, where it's just a few very rich people and then monarchs and lords borrowing money as well. So,
all
I think
right.
that's a good note to end on there.
Yeah, it's a perfect note to end on it. Well above the hour, but it's for good reason, man. But before we go, I want to give you a hint on what's going to be the first subject in part 2.
Mercantilism.
Yep, mercantilism. Yep, one of the most controversial fantasies in economic history. Yeah, we're going to be tackling this starting in part 2, and from here we're going to start to get into the more modern economies. But this was actually one of the predecessors to the modern economy. Guys, so please join us in a couple of weeks for that when we talk about as we continue talking about the history of currency, and then from there we get into stocks and all that good stuff that we are so into right now. But before we go, I want to wish all my American friends, including myself, happy Thanksgiving. Hope you enjoy with your family. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you enjoy it. We'll be back the week after Thanksgiving. We'll be right back here. So come on by and join us then. Until then, that has been my man, Aiden Cordier. I have been Anxious Maximus. And we'll see you in 2 weeks on. And we're going to be continuing the discussion of currency. And by the way, one more note I want to leave you off. We're going to be next week. We'll be 7 more episodes away from 50.
Ooh, so close, so close.
Yep, so close. I think we're going to be hitting that sometime in February of next in 2026. So be on the lookout. We're going to come up with something cool with that. But until then, take care, guys, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.